Okay, so thank you very much to Mark Warner for coming on to the Future Foods interviews. Mark Warner is CEO and co-founder of Liberation Labs, a massive biomanufacturing facility based in Indiana, USA. They're at the forefront in precision fermentation technology and provide the picks and shovels at a very exciting time for a very exciting industry. Does that sound about right, Mark?
Definitely. We're the only caveat to add is we're about halfway built in construction. So the facility is not operational yet. If you're on video, the people who can see me behind, that's a picture of our facility behind me. We started construction about 18 months ago and expect it to be complete at the end of this year. So it's been exciting to see it go up.
Oh, so quite soon then. So you expect it to be up and running by the end of the year?
Complete by the end of the year, in operation early next year, yes.
Okay, so before we start, I was wondering whether you could just sort of give us a quick lesson in what precision fermentation actually is and what it's used for, what it's good for.
Sure. So one of the best examples to use is, beer. Everyone loves beer. So you think of brewing beer, you take yeast and you feed it sugar, and it secretes or puts alcohol into the water solution. You then remove the yeast, and what's left over, the alcohol and water, is your product. In the case of synthetic biology, they go in and they make some tweaks to the yeast or E. coli or other organisms. And instead of secreting things like alcohol, they secrete proteins, egg replicates, whey replicates, others. Now, the second difference, so that's the front end biology. That's not what we do. That's what these great novel synthetic biology companies do. But then one thing that's different and a little more complicated in what we're doing for food is the product isn't just, a liquid solution with that protein in it. Generally, you want to purify that to a dry product. There may be other salts and other things you need to remove. So we're really a contract manufacturer. We're looking to bring that manufacturing platform specifically for these new products where we can take these technologies, brew them, for lack of a better word, but then refine through our downstream processing to get a product that can go into the existing infrastructure as far as a dried egg product, those kind of materials for foods.
Right. Okay. So you expect to be, obviously it's a very kind of detailed and technological service that you provide in a kind of bespoke way, I suppose, for specific companies. So they would have to have quite a large turnover, I suppose, to use your facilities.
Yeah, definitely. So we are. The only thing I'd say about bespoke is we try not to be bespoke in that. To me, bespoke means somebody building a plant just for their process. We're very familiar with the range of processes in the industry, and we've intentionally built this facility to run a majority of the processes out there. So we try and be able to host a broad range. And we think that's important for a couple of reasons. First, most of these companies, although they're great at the biology, building and operating a facility isn't really core to what they do. So we definitely help fill that gap. And to really talk about size, that's one of the main differences between what's out there today and what's needed. So a lot of these great companies now are going out to existing network of what's usually older pharmaceutical sites that were built 30, 40, 50 years ago. And they're making these products, but they're not making them at the scale and cost structure needed for food. Because one thing we all know about food, while it may seem we're paying $100 or euros or pounds a kilogram for food, people don't want to pay over, $2, $3, $4 a kilogram. So you really need to get that cost structure down, which is what we're really focused at. You need larger scale, higher throughput, built to food standards. The use of these pharmaceutical facilities just isn't going to meet the cost structure that's needed. That's, what we've been saying is, and we believe quite strongly in our premises, it's not that we can't make these products today. It's a cost and economic issue. We're not making them at the price points needed for wide acceptance.
Right. Okay. You wrote a book called How to Make Proteins. No, well, it was a handbook, right? Which you wrote called How to Make Proteins Without Animals and Fuels and Chemicals Without Crude Oil. So, so am I right in understanding that fuel could be a byproduct of some of the main products, or would that be a product in itself?
That would be a product in itself. Our focus is primarily at, I'll say, proteins, food proteins and non-food proteins. There's not a lot of foods, or excuse me, not a lot of fuels that fit the platform we're making. It is a little bit different. Certainly, I've worked on those in the past. We felt that the need out there and where we saw the biggest shortfall was in the food space. But just to mention that, so if it's, when I say protein, we can make food proteins that are, they're egg white equivalents, they're casein for cheese, they're whey from milk. Proteins are also things like spider silks that go into materials. There's also proteins that are made, believe it or not, for things like biopesticides. They spray them on fruit to keep things from mold growing. From our process perspective, we don't really care what kind of protein it is. We think the majority will be food, but there's certainly other non-food proteins we can make. Infant formula components is a good example. Lactoferrin, which comes from cow milk, something called HMOs, human milk oligosaccharides. It's not technically a protein, it's a large polysaccharide or sugar molecule, but it acts like a protein, so we're able to produce it and recover it.
Mm. Okay, so in regard to fuel, would that, would there be like a byproduct such as methane from kind of creating?
Not really. Our wastewater materials, so the leftover biomass often goes to wastewater. It's eventually turned into methane at the wastewater treatment plant. I'd have a hard time directly calling it a fuel, but it's certainly a beneficial reuse. Now, we're also looking, and a lot of the customers we're talking to are hoping for what I'd call upscale uses, meaning there's ways in animal feeds and foods, or even different probiotic or other applications. So those are all possibilities, but our base case is sending it to wastewater treatment.
You mentioned earlier that that you could produce egg white. So I know that Formo is a company that is producing that. Is this a company that you might be working with in the future?
I mean, there certainly would fit our profile. We've talked to about 25 companies. There's a handful in the space. You've got Onego and Clare that also make an egg protein. I think when we talk the whey proteins, I think there's over 10 that we've talked to and believe that are a fit. So I certainly think there's a lot of good opportunities out there. And it's, that's the one thing I'll just say proactively. I think at times, so much of the industry is focused on, we can make products to replicate, animal products. I think a lot of these egg whites, if you look at Clare Foods, if you look at Formo, if you look at Onego, they would all argue theirs is better than the animal equivalent, that it has better foaming properties and things. What a big baker would buy that material for? These synthetically derived products are often have more what we call functionality. A lot of these proteins, why have you put an egg into a cake mix for, decades or millennia? It's because it's a liquid at room temperature, but when you cook it, it solidifies. That gelation or solidification is a function. Those are the kind of things that typically these novel proteins are used for.
Yeah. So what kind of capacity does Liberation Labs provide? Because obviously you've been building it for a while and you've still got a good sort of 6 or 7 months left. So it must be huge, as I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we're calling a launch facility. It's on the lower end of commercial scale, meaning in the world of full-size fermentation, it's certainly not the biggest, but it is a commercial facility. The main fermenters are 150,000 liters. There's 4 of them. So the whole facility is 600,000 liters. The output of the facility really depends on the process we run. Typically, it's in the range of maybe 600 to 1,200 metric tons of a pure protein. And it's important when you hear that number to understand this isn't just a basic protein that goes into any food. These are these functional compounds that are higher value and do things like casein in the cheese or the egg whites or things they have a functionality that brings them higher value in the space. You often hear them called the hero ingredients going into recipes.
Okay. So once it's up and running, I mean, I'm not a scientist, as you can probably tell, but so will you be feeding these bioreactors some kind of nutrients in order to grow your products? And if so, where, what are the ingredients? What are the, what are you feeding it, and how are you getting that,
Sure.
materials?
The main feedstocks are usually a carbon source, or what we'd call sugar. It can be corn sugar, it can be sugar cane. A lot of that depends on the geography you're in. In the United States, where we're building the first facility, it's usually all corn sugar. For the chemists listening to this, dextrose. As you go to other parts of the world, it's a higher mix of sugar cane or beets, which is a sucrose. Again, it depends on the end process. Most of these organisms can eat either one, so it doesn't matter to us that much. And then there's small nutrients and things, salts, yeast extracts. Think of it kind of like vitamins for the organisms. Nothing that's that exotic from what humans or other animals would eat, just in different structures.
Right. Okay. So you said that you're not one of the largest facilities of your sort. So what makes Liberation Labs special?
Well, a couple things. So this first facility isn't the largest. So the first facility we're building in Richmond is 600,000 liters. We have plans, and the facility we purchased has space for a 4 million liter facility. That's about 5-6 times bigger than what we're building now. And that's closer to some of the bigger fermentation facilities in the world. And that's really for cost reasons. The bigger you get, the better the cost structure. So generally, we would expect about a third lower manufacturing cost at very large scale. When you get into things like food proteins, that's important. We're building the smaller facility initially really just to prove the market, make sure there's plenty of material and offtake to support the larger facility. Then the other thing that makes us, a couple things make us unique. First, we're fit for purpose. We're designed for these current processes, not for processes of 20, 30 years ago. The other thing is we're looking to build a network of facilities. So our first facilities in the US, we're looking at 6 geographies ultimately. Our first phase involves facilities both in the Middle East and Australia. We've been in site selection for probably a year now. We expect to announce that second facility probably later this year. It's not, from our perspective, a question of if we build in either of them, it's which geographies next. And these really come down to a mixture of where the product need and offtake is and the ability to make it at a low cost. Certainly US and Australia, a lot of sugarcane in Australia, a lot of renewable power. It's a good area. Same with the US. Middle East doesn't have quite the good cost structure, but there's enough of a food security issue. It's hard to get milk products and other things that balances out. And then our second wave is Brazil, Southeast Asia, and Europe. Europe's a good example. Yeah, that's where a lot of the capacity is today. And part of the problem today is it's just not where you build a facility, unfortunately, for cost reasons. Literally, the cost of power today, which my guess is you're sadly aware of, is 5 times as high in Europe as it is in the US, literally 5 times higher.
Right. Yes. Yes. I mean, it is. I was speaking to somebody recently who builds. They build bioreactors for cultivated meat. They're called Cultivated Meats Limited, and he's based in Wales. So I suppose the point is that they're kind of looking for alternative ways to power their
Yeah.
their product. So so you're looking at the Middle East and Australia. Now I suppose it doesn't really depend so much on regulatory approval because it's not I mean, yes, it is novel foods that you'll be making, isn't it? But it's not
It is novel foods, but it does depend. So part of the reason the US was easy was I used to work at Impossible Foods. I was their chief engineering officer. If I make an Impossible burger today, I can really only sell it in the US. I can sell it in Singapore, I can sell it in Israel, but those aren't that big of markets.
right.
Um, so that's part of it. We do believe, and this is granted, speculation, the belief is Australia is on a pretty good path, the Middle East also. Europe's not as clear. And the other reason we're looking at Australia is both for Australian consumption, but also as a potential to serve the rest of Asia. For IP and other reasons, sometimes our clients won't put their biotechnology into a manufacturing facility within China. So if you look at the supply chains today, Northern Australia, Queensland, which is really where they grow sugar, that services a lot of products into Asia overall and China specifically today.
Right. Okay. And what do you think is the ultimate goal? I mean, obviously you are looking to expand into lots of different territories, and I suppose America should keep you quite busy for a while. I mean, what's the ultimate goal for Liberation Labs?
The ultimate goal is to continue to build a platform that lets these technologies be profitable, both us and them. Because probably the biggest obstacle in the industry has been we put a lot of these good products out. We haven't put a lot of volume of them. So even though they have this great ability for carbon impact and other things, that only happens if you're actually making a lot of them, and cost has been the obstacle. So, we're very clear we can't do it all ourselves. The biology has to continue to improve, but it has been. So we're bringing the manufacturing solution, larger scale, lower cost, that when paired with this improved biology, we think we'll get more products closer to cost parity. Because the industry often dances around it, but in the end, you need cost parity or close to it. There may be a slight preference for these products for a lot of reasons. People aren't going to pay significantly more, at least in our view.
Yes. And what's your personal drive behind this? Is it kind of environmental, or is it
Yeah, I would say sustainability. Certainly, I like the animal welfare component, but a lot of my push on the sustainability is there's been a lot of money go into the industry. We're just not making the products. I'm a manufacturing person, as I like to say, modeling something in a spreadsheet about an impact isn't the same as causing an impact. So,
yeah.
The other thing that gets me excited about these and the drive is I sincerely believe most of these products will end up being better than their current animal incumbents. And I think that's going to help us in a lot of areas. I do think it's, while we'd like to see a wider adoption, it's something, we're hoping to do this the old-fashioned way of make better products at a good price that has people wanting to get them. We often hear the climate push, and again, not that we don't want to see the climate succeed, but it's like this. I often hear it referred to as the eat your peas argument. Do this because it's good for the environment. I'd love to believe more people are going to do it. I think we have a better chance if we just make it something they want to eat and at a reasonable price. And the sustainability is the benefit that comes along.
Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of there's a risk of kind of negative press if you kind of focus on environmental issues, because it's kind of hard to sort of balance the press, isn't it?
That's not the reason we do it. It's more I just don't think it's the economic driver. You'll keep hearing us come down to economics. We've certainly built a team that has a lot more years in the industry and experience, and I will say in many ways, we're run more like a traditional industry that's a hybrid of a startup than the other way around, meaning we understand what it takes to products to market. that things like positive cash flow, I've heard this in the industry for a while, but at some point, if we don't start repaying investors, they're going to quit investing money. There's been a lot of money go in, and that's really a lot of our push, is to get those products out there, get them at positive margin, both for us and the end client, because that's in the end what we need. Once, there's a lot of talk, and government programs are great, subsidies are great, those are all great. But in the end, the biggest thing keeping us from really wide adoption is showing business models where the economics work. I'm convinced, there are billions of dollars to be invested. They just want to see a more traditional business model of, binding offtakes, cash flow, and those kind of things.
Yeah. So you were saying it's very expensive to build. I mean, how much has it cost so far?
So this facility we're building is $115 million US. So they're certainly expensive, but it all comes down to volume. They are so much more efficient and can put out so much more product than these legacy facilities. If you think of using a 40 or 50-year-old facility, granted, you say, okay, my capital's a lot less. I got this old facility for half or less. But if you're using more power, the equipment's older, so you're using more labor. Maybe your recovery yield is probably not as good. You're using more sugar. What we found is, what we like to tell people is, it's not that we want to spend the capital, but the return on that incremental capital is so positive just because we can manufacture at such higher throughput and efficiency, it makes sense. But that's, again, coming to kind of the old school business principles. If you're spending a big amount of capital, it should be because you're convinced it's giving you better return.
So with all that expense up front, how soon do you think it'll be before you start turning a profit and investors start?
Yeah, well, I mean, once we're operating, we believe it'll be profitable first year. The facility itself, once it's built, you put the front end capital in. The facility has very, very solid operating margins, and we're quite confident in the first year we'll be cash flow positive and profitable.
Okay, so what's the I mean, if there are any obstacles, do you see any substantial obstacles to sort of becoming, to your growth and the continued growth of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you, it's been some tough capital markets. We've been fortunate. We've raised about 2/3 of the cost of the facility. We've raised, $36 million in equity. We got a $25 million USDA governmental loan guarantee. We also have a $30 million equipment finance mechanism. You add all those up, that gets us about 2/3 of the way. We're in a very late stage of a fundraise that we believe is going to close in the next month. So we've gotten there, but the days of raising all the money 2 years in advance to build the facility and knowing your path, that just hasn't been our path. We've been fortunate to be backed by some investors that are deeply committed to the space. Our base initial investors were Agronomics, owned by Jim Mellon in the UK, and City Capital. They're also in the food space. They've seen the need and let us move forward at speed, which we believe in the end is going to be a very good decision. But, it's, as we like to say, it's hard to take off in an airplane knowing you have to build the landing gear while you're flying. But we felt very good about it so far.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose because people have invested so much money already, it's something that they just can't afford to let it fail at this stage.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I mean, the business is still looking very, very solid. We have a lot of interest in the facility, both from startups and from big multinationals. Facility's been on schedule and on budget. So, there's certainly no way to mitigate all risk, but I think both us and our investors so far have been very happy with the progress and the forecast going forward.
So you're confident that you'll meet your next kind of funding call?
We believe so, as confident as anyone can be in this environment. But we've had an external lead that we secured late last year. And like I said, we're through diligence and on a path, we believe, to close in the next month or two.
Okay, and that will be enough to see you to sort of profitability, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
to facility operation and profitability.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because 23 has been a very bad year generally, like you were saying, 2022 saw sort of record funding, and 23 it was almost like a tenth of the amount. So was there ever a time where you were kind of worried that it was all going to go pear-shaped?
Not real. I've been doing this a long time, 30 plus years. I've worked for over 100 startups. So I will tell you it's not for the faint of heart, but I've had the continued belief that the business model we have is strong, that quite literally the industry's put $4 or $5 billion in the front end biology and processes without putting anything in the infrastructure to manufacture it. So we believe from the beginning it's a very solid business proposition, and as low of risk as anything you see in the space today.
Yeah. Well, I suppose investing in the picks and shovels side of the industry is a safer bet than investing in the companies themselves, right?
And that's, I will tell you, if we had tried to do Liberation Labs 4 or 5 years ago with the amount of capital and fixed assets we have, it would have been a tough sell. In a very tough market, having something that had a physical asset went from a negative to somewhat of a positive. I think a lot of people saw, quite literally, we're not sure what of these companies that's all IP that if, something happens and their model doesn't pan out is basically worthless, that having something with an asset at least had more downside protection. Not that you want that to be your base case, but it's, you'd be kidding yourself if you didn't acknowledge those are the conversations you have, both what's the upside and what's the mitigation of downside.
Yeah, I mean, it's the scaling up that is the big blockage, I suppose. When people are kind of thinking, how can this industry expand if they don't have the bioreactors? But there is also talk that there just isn't the amount of raw materials to build the number of bioreactors that are required to properly scale up. Have you heard that argument?
No, I mean, I think it's, I think within reason, I think a lot of those projections don't show a lot of biologic improvement. And it's, how much of what's used today we offset is certainly part of that. But I think in the near term, the amount that we're building compared to what goes into food facilities, brewing facilities, and other things today, I don't think is that different. So it could be a longer term issue. Now, there are some issues near term. There's not a lot of fabricators that can make this specialized equipment. And quite frankly, there's not a lot of people experienced in building these facilities. We've gone out of our way to really build a team of people deeply experienced in design, build, operation of large scale fermentation, but it's not a big world. And it's, last facility I built was in Brazil. It was size of a larger facility we have planned. That was 11 years ago. And that's one of the last major precision fermentation facilities built in the world.
Wow. So you've been in this industry for a long time. How did you first get involved?
I started 35 years ago with a company, Monsanto Chemical. Although it was a chemical company, we made a product called vanillin. If you look at a chocolate bar, it's the vanilla flavoring in a chocolate bar. It was made from waste pulp and paper black liquor. It was a byproduct we recovered. And, that got me started in the kind of, we'll call it green chemical. As I like to say, 35 years ago, we didn't know it was a green chemical. It's just what we made. And just over the years, it's really been about 20 years now, I've been focused on industrial biotech. Started in the biofuels days and then, worked at a couple large biotech companies. Impossible Foods was one, another company, Solazyme, and have just focused for the last 20 years on large scale commercialization of facilities. It's really my area of expertise.
So I suspect you've been watching Impossible Foods with quite some interest in their growth. How do you think they're doing?
They're doing well. I mean, still a lot of friends there. I worked there in the early days. It's like most in the industry. I go back to my biofuels days, and I tell people, the reporting of the, alternate meat and alternate protein industry and being dead is, I think, over-reported. I heard that 3 or 4 times. I was involved in 2007 in making the first aviation biofuel. It was for a Virgin Atlantic flight. And during the 10, 12, 15, you kept hearing, oh, aviation biofuel never be cost effective, this and that. You're seeing half a dozen facilities being built worldwide today. These technologies just take time to mature. And I think you're seeing some with the companies like Impossible. They've had to, from what I understand, I haven't been involved for years, but they've had to step back a little, brought in some outside industry people from Chobani and others. And, it's kind of the one step back, 2 steps forward. But I think you'll see them and others continue to make progress forward. I actually saw, for the first time ever, I saw an advertisement on television for Impossible Foods, which I had never seen on television. So they're certainly trying to get back out there in the market.
Yeah. So how soon do you think it will be before, kind of cultivated meat? I know it's not your area, but how soon do you think it'll be before it becomes a kind of a standard thing for people to buy in the supermarket?
Hard to say. I haven't, it's been a while since I've dealt in the cultivated space. It's definitely a little more of a newer technology than the microbial fermentation we're doing.
Yeah.
From what I've seen, I think there's a lot of promise. There's a lot of reasons why it could and should work. So I'm still optimistic it'll get there, but whether it's a couple years, 5 to, I can't say,
Right.
but I'm still generally optimistic it will get there.
And what's the first product we're going to see from Liberation Labs?
It's not for sure yet. I would say highest probability is a dairy type protein, an egg protein, a casein, a whey, and that's for a couple reasons. Those are the ones that have some of the widest acceptance. Today, many of us, including myself, have been drinking alternate milks for 10 or 15 years. Just, you brought up the meat space. It's a little more challenged with pushback on regulations. So we just think, and this is just a business perspective, we think we're the applications. A lot of what we're talking about when you talk the eggs and the wheys and things, those are B2B ingredients, meaning it's not going direct on a store shelf. It's going to a major food producer, a Unilever, a Nestle, a somebody who's very often, I think it was Unilever that's announced recently, an ice cream line from non-cow whey, those kind of things. So that's our speculation, possibly infant formula components. There's a lot of infant formula components. We've had issues in the US on supply. We're certainly talking to multiple entities that are looking to do that also.
Yeah, I've heard Jim Mellon talk about kind of breaking into the alternative milk market a few times.
Yeah.
So, I mean, has Jim got quite a kind of active involvement in Liberation Labs? I mean, do you?
Yeah, I mean, he's on our board and chairman of the board. We talk to him regularly. He's been very supportive, both financially linking people up, and he's been, he's had the vision and drive, and he's, I'd say the biggest thing about Jim, and this is true of most all of our board members, they come from very mature business backgrounds. Nothing rattles them. They're looking for the long game. They're not looking for the short-term successes. They're looking for the long game, which is what you need when you're building a facility that's going to take a couple years to get there. They're absolutely resolute in the need in the end business model. So they've been very supportive.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Mark, for coming on to Future Food. It's been fascinating to get your insight. Is there anything else you'd like to add before I let you get back to work?
No, this has been great. Appreciate the opportunity.
It's been my pleasure. And I hope to catch up again in the future.
Great. Thank you.